David, what is tip number 3 for us, please?
So tip number 3, to do homework. So we, as a school, we are moving away from, we're not calling it homework anymore, we're calling it practice. And I think the biggest problem with homework is when you're expecting students to engage in something that is unfamiliar to them, and this is why I'm not the biggest fan of sort of flipped learning, where students have to encounter something that maybe they're going to learn in the future, because what you're sort of setting students up to do is, or in my opinion, what I think you're sort of setting students up to do is for them to go home and encounter something on their own, or possibly with the help of a parent that isn't an expert in the subject and the content that you want them to engage in. And the chances are, if they can't, they're going to give up very, very quickly. So in terms of homework, so it's not confusing, so there's no excuse that students can't engage in the content that you want them to. Make sure that it just builds upon what they're doing in the lessons, and provide plenty of opportunities for students to practice. So essentially our homework policy, or the way in which we're doing homework now, is we've created what we're calling practice booklets. So it's essentially 2 pages of knowledge and then so many weeks worth of practice activities, and then it's broken up with knowledge, practice, and it just builds upon what is being learnt in terms of the curriculum, what's being learnt in the classroom. Simply because, as I've said, if we encounter information that's unfamiliar to us without the expert being the teacher there, we're far likely to develop misconceptions, we're far likely to disengage with it if it becomes too tricky, too difficult. And we also have to factor in that for some children, unfortunately, they might not have the means to participate in the manner that you wish for them to do so. So there's lots of fantastic platforms, Seneca, Carousel, all fantastic, superb packages that students can access. But if they haven't got the means by which to participate, i.e. they've only got one computer in a household of three siblings, it becomes really difficult. So what I would say is consider how you want your students to participate in their homework. Make it something that is going to be simple to understand in terms of how to engage with the activity, and use it as an opportunity to actually build their memory, build their knowledge, and develop everything in terms of their long-term memory.
This is good. It's a biggie, homework. I'm really pleased you've brought this up. And again, it's always interesting to hear this from a different subject perspective. So just a couple of reflections and a few questions for you here, David. The thing about homework that I like in principle is it's the ideal retrieval opportunity, because the kids can spend a lot longer on it or focus on the areas they need, whereas in class there's often this requirement to kind of move at a certain pace, and if you need a bit longer on something but the class is ready to move on, you don't get it. So in theory, homework's great, but as you say, there are a number of issues with homework, and we've certainly had in our school a whole cohort of students who just don't engage in homework for whatever reason. One thing where maths has a big advantage, I think, over lots of subjects is we can go to town on kind of automated marking. So, you can set kids online homework on pretty much all of maths, and it'll mark it for them. And I know that obviously with things like Carousel and Seneca, you can do that to a certain extent with other subjects. But how important is it for you that the kids know what to do when stuck on homework, if that makes sense? If you set a homework to a child, and if they come back to you the next lesson and say, look, sir, I couldn't do it because I was stuck, I didn't know what to do. Is that like a valid excuse, or do you have kind of protocols in there where essentially if kids are stuck, there's a definite kind of process they have to go through, if that makes sense? Yeah,
so what I've sort of outlined in terms of the practice booklets that we are moving to them, we haven't moved to them yet, but in terms of what they will do in them, it will be very similar in terms of what they're doing in the classroom. So it will be a lot of knowledge-based questions that require them to engage in the sort of pages of knowledge that are within the booklet. So it should, in theory, it should be relatively straightforward and self-explanatory in terms of what they need to do. But I do think it's important, and we're going to have this period of time, this transition, where we are going to need to train the students in terms of the expectations of how to go around engaging in it, what to do if you are stuck, what to do if if you want to get further ahead, like you've shown mastery in this element, is there opportunity for you to go on and develop in further areas? So yeah, absolutely. I think you've got to outline your expectations, and you've got to follow them through, just like in anything that you do in school. But I do think it is really important that they have that opportunity to practice and to be trained on it, and not just the students as well, but I think the parents as well. They've got an opportunity. So at the front of the booklet, there's sort of like a little blurb to the parents that explains the forgetting curve and the importance of practice and the simple memory model. There's going to be a video on the school website about how to go about completing the practice tasks, and then this sort of thing, where if your child is stuck, or if they do encounter anything that they can't do, what do you do in that situation? So a sort of bit of a FAQ, a bit of a troubleshooting, so to speak.
Yeah, it's good. That I love that. Just the whole purpose of homework, I think, is a really interesting one. I think I've made that mistake in the past, where obviously I know why I'm setting homework to the kids, but do the kids know? And I think that the idea of having the forgetting curve on that, I think, is really smart. Just last question on this, David. When Adam Boxer was on the show, he made the point that the biggest thing he's done in terms of homework is to make sure it feeds into lessons. And I think that's a mistake I've made for many years. Homework's almost like this separate thing. You set it, and then, okay, maybe at the start of the next lesson, I'll have a word with a couple of the kids who haven't done the homework or whatever. But then it's okay, and we move on. Now it's back to classwork. The more I think about it, the more I'm on board with this, that homework really needs to play a pivotal role in lessons. I wonder if you agree, and I wonder what role homework plays in your lessons, David.
I do agree. And one of the sort of pieces of work for planning for these practice booklets was I was listening to what Adam had said on your show, and he'd written a blog, I think, through Carousel about the idea of practice and the benefits of it. And I think everything I've sort of said so far probably just builds on what Adam said. I think it's important it builds on what's going on in the lesson for two main reasons. Number one, it takes the guesswork out of how to engage in the activity that the students need to do. So there's that. It's less likely that students are going to get stuck, so I can't do my homework. And then number two, you build in that strong foundational knowledge that means students are going to progress, students are going to learn, and yeah, absolutely. I can't think of, when I reflect on how I've done things in the past, I can't think of why I ever did it like that. There's got to be. I think there's got to be opportunities from time to time where you go off piste, especially in a subject like geography, where maybe you go off piste and something's come up in the news, and it's going to enrich whatever it is that you're doing in your curriculum at that moment in time. But what I would say is, thinking about Tom Sherrington's mode A, mode B, mode A, mode B, 80, that sort of 80-20 model, 80% of the time, 80+% of the time, students should be practicing and developing their knowledge around what is going on in the lessons in your curriculum.
Brilliant, that. Fantastic. Okay.